Rebecca's marriage began to unravel on an otherwise unremarkable day. It was a crisp autumn morning, the scent of rain lingering in the cool air and the distant hum of traffic seeping through the apartment windows. She sat at the kitchen counter, staring into the swirling remnants of her coffee. For a moment, everything felt deceptively normal, peaceful even, as if the storm that was about to break over her life hadn't yet touched her consciousness. Her husband, Mark, was in the shower, humming a tune she didn't recognize. His carefree mood stood in stark contrast to the weight pressing down on her chest. They had been married for 6 years, a marriage that from the outside seemed perfect. Stability, routine, and quiet affection had defined their relationship. Friends often marveled at how well they fit together, at the ease with which they lived their lives side by side. They attended the same parties, laughed at the same jokes, and vacationed in the same places every year, as if their lives were a well-rehearsed performance. Everything about them appeared synchronized, unshakable. But underneath that glossy surface, cracks had begun to form. A sense of emptiness, unspoken and growing. Rebecca couldn't pinpoint exactly when things started to change, but she could remember the moment it became impossible to ignore. It was 6 months ago, during a weekend getaway. She and Mark had rented a cabin by a lake, a setting designed to inspire romance. But instead of rekindling their passion, the trip only highlighted the growing distance between them. They spent the weekend in stifling silence, their attempts at conversation strained and awkward. What should have been intimate moments felt forced, hollow. They hadn't been physically close in months, but during that trip, the emotional gap between them became glaringly obvious. The fire that once burned between them had long since gone out, leaving only cold ashes behind. That weekend marked the beginning of Rebecca's restlessness. She didn't know what exactly she was searching for, only that it wasn't in her marriage anymore. The dull ache of dissatisfaction gnawed at her, a creeping sense that there had to be more to life, more to love. And then she met Nathan. Nathan was everything Mark wasn't. He was spontaneous, quick-witted, and irresistibly charming. They met by chance at a work conference, and Rebecca was drawn to him almost immediately. He had an easy confidence, a warmth that seemed to fill the sterile, corporate room where they first spoke. At first, it was nothing more than friendly conversation over drinks. But soon, the texts became more frequent, the meetings more clandestine, until one night, they found themselves alone in a dimly lit bar, and Rebecca gave in to the pull between them, sharing a kiss that would change everything. She hadn't intended to cheat. It wasn't something she thought herself capable of, not before Nathan. But being with him awakened something in her, a long-dormant sense of desire and excitement that she hadn't felt in years. With Nathan, she felt alive again, and that was how she justified it to herself. It wasn't that she didn't love Mark. She did in a quiet, comfortable way. But she had forgotten how to feel passion, how to feel anything beyond the routine. Nathan reminded her what it was like to want, to feel exhilaration. As weeks passed, the affair deepened, consuming her thoughts. Every stolen moment with Nathan felt intoxicating, a heady mix of danger and desire. The secrecy only made it more thrilling. But in her mind, Nathan was never meant to replace Mark. He was an escape, nothing more. A fleeting way to reignite the spark that had fizzled out in her marriage. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. But the more she saw Nathan, the harder it became to ignore the growing chasm in her life with Mark. And then came the night when Rebecca decided to broach the subject with her husband. Maybe, she thought, if they tried something new together, it could pull them back from the brink. She had read stories online, accounts of couples who experimented with open relationships or threesomes, and found their marriages stronger afterward. If it worked for them, why not for her and Mark? Maybe this was the key to reigniting their passion. It was a Saturday evening. They had just finished dinner, and Rebecca poured herself a glass of wine to steady her nerves. Her mind raced, rehearsing the conversation in her head. She found Mark sitting on the couch, flipping through TV channels absent-mindedly. Taking a deep breath, she sat beside him and cleared her throat. "Mark, can I ask you something?" she began, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. He glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "Sure, what's up?" Rebecca hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "How do you feel about trying something new? You know, in the bedroom." Mark looked puzzled, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Her pulse quickened. "Well, I've been thinking a lot lately, and I was wondering if maybe we could explore other people." The room fell into a heavy silence. Mark's expression shifted, confusion giving way to disbelief. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice barely masking his shock. Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. "I mean, we've been together for so long, and maybe trying something new could help us. You know, spice things up." Mark stared at her, his face unreadable. "Are you talking about an open relationship or a threesome?" Rebecca's voice faltered. "Maybe," she admitted, gripping her wine glass tightly. "It's just, I've been reading about it, and some couples say it really helped them. It made them feel closer, more connected." Mark leaned back on the couch, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "And who exactly did you have in mind for this?" A knot formed in Rebecca's stomach. She had anticipated surprise, maybe even curiosity, but not the skepticism now lacing Mark's voice. "I don't know," she stammered. "I hadn't really thought that far." Mark didn't respond immediately. He set the remote down, fixing her with a steady gaze. "Have you already done something?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavier than any of the doubts Rebecca had harbored before. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been so careful, so certain that she had hidden her affair with Nathan well. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every secret rendezvous had been meticulously planned to avoid suspicion. But standing there, feeling the intensity of Mark's gaze, she realized that all her efforts had been in vain. Mark knew her better than anyone, better than she even knew herself. He didn't need to hear her confession. He could see it, etched into her face, reflected in the guilt that clouded her eyes. Her mouth felt dry, and her voice cracked as she struggled to form words. "It's not what you think," she stammered, her gaze dropping to the floor. I needed to feel something again." Mark's jaw clenched, his silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, a palpable tension that hung in the air. For a long moment he said nothing, his eyes never leaving her face, as if he was willing her to speak the truth she was too scared to admit. When he finally did speak, his voice was chillingly calm, cold and steady. "Who is he?" The question landed like a punch, knocking the breath from her lungs. Rebecca swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had hoped to avoid this moment, had convinced herself that she could keep Nathan's name hidden. But now, under the pressure of Mark's unwavering gaze, the truth clawed its way up her throat. "It's not like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be serious." Mark didn't flinch. His eyes were steely, his face unreadable. "Who is he?" She felt her chest tighten as a lump rose in her throat. There was no escaping this now. "Nathan," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "He's a guy from work." For a long moment, Mark simply stared at her, as though trying to comprehend the enormity of what she had just said. His eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Disbelief, betrayal, fury. Slowly, without a word, he stood up and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his decision. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and isolation. Mark didn't speak to her. He didn't touch her. It was as if she no longer existed to him. He went through the motions of his daily routine, but there was a coldness to him that cut her to the core. Each time she tried to reach out, to say something, to apologize, he would shut her down with a look, a glance so filled with disdain that it stopped her words before they even formed. The silence between them became unbearable. It crushed her, a constant reminder of what she had done, of the trust she had shattered. She hadn't realized how much she had hurt him until she saw the emptiness in his eyes. In her search for excitement, for something new to fill the void in her life, She had destroyed the one thing that mattered most. One night, after a long, painfully quiet dinner, Mark finally spoke. His voice was calm, too calm. "I want a divorce." The words hit her like a freight train. Rebecca's stomach lurched, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Divorce? She had never imagined it would come to this. In her mind, she had convinced herself that they could work through it, that they could rebuild what was broken. But the look in Mark's eyes told her that this wasn't something that could be fixed. "Mark, please," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you." Mark shook his head, his face hard, his expression unreadable. "You don't get it, Rebecca. You broke us. I trusted you, and you threw that trust away for what? A fling? A thrill?" "It wasn't just that," Rebecca pleaded, her voice cracking. "I was lost. I didn't know how to fix us, and I made a mistake." Mark's eyes narrowed, his voice turning to ice. "It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And you chose to destroy everything we had." Rebecca broke down, sobbing into her hands. She had always believed that no matter what, they would find a way through, that their marriage was strong enough to survive anything. But this was different. This was betrayal on a level that left scars too deep to heal. Mark stood, grabbing his jacket with a finality that made Rebecca's heart sink. "I'll be staying at my brother's for a while," he said, his voice cold and detached. "I'll send over the divorce papers in a few days." She wanted to beg him to stay, to plead with him for just one more chance to fix things, to make it right. But deep down, she knew it was too late. The damage had been done. There was no going back, no undoing the hurt she had caused. As Mark walked out the door, a hollow emptiness settled in Rebecca's chest. She had wanted excitement, something to fill the void in her life. But all she had found was regret. The weeks that followed felt like an endless stretch of suffocating silence. Rebecca found herself alone in their once shared apartment, the emptiness of the space a constant reminder of everything she had lost. The sound of the door closing behind Mark replayed in her mind, each time more painful than the last. Nathan tried to reach out a few times, calling her, leaving messages. But the thrill that had once consumed her, the spark that had drawn her to him, had vanished. Now, his name felt like a bitter aftertaste, a reminder of the choices she wished she had never made. She ignored his calls, wanting nothing to do with him or the chaos he had unwittingly become a part of. In the quiet of her isolation, Rebecca spent her days scrolling through the same online spaces where she had once found validation and excitement, reading the same stories that had lured her into a fantasy world of dangerous temptations. But now, instead of feeling inspired or curious, all she felt was shame. Those stories no longer seemed glamorous or daring. They were cautionary tales. Stories of people just like her who had thrown away the people they loved for a fleeting moment of passion. Late one night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought crept into her mind. Was this what she had wanted all along? Had she subconsciously sought out destruction, knowing that it would force her to confront the cracks in her life that she had ignored for so long? She didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear. She had lost everything. Her husband, her marriage, her sense of who she was. All for a brief moment of excitement, a thrill that had disappeared as quickly as it had come. And now, all that remained was the crushing weight of regret.